The rain hammered against the broken windows of the Ashford mansion as Maria clutched her swollen belly, desperate and 8 months pregnant with nowhere to go. She'd knocked on dozens of doors in this wealthy neighborhood, begging for work, for shelter, for anything. When the frail Mrs. Ashford finally answered, Maria made a promise she couldn't afford to keep. "I just want to help fix your house, madam. I'll work for free if you let me stay." What Maria didn't know was that she'd just walked into the most dangerous house in the city. Hidden beneath decades of dust and decay in that forgotten attic lay bundles of cash that belonged to the Torrino crime family, money that had been missing for 30 years, the same money that had already cost 3 people their lives. As Maria's hammer broke through the rotting floorboards above, she had no idea she was about to become the most hunted woman in the state. "But here's what I want to know. Would you risk everything for a chance to give your child a better life?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Ashford's trembling hand gripped the doorframe as she studied Maria's face through the storm. Lightning illuminated the hollow cheeks of a woman who hadn't eaten properly in weeks, her second-hand coat stretched tight across her pregnant form. Behind her, the October wind sent leaves spiraling through the darkness like lost souls. "Child," Mrs. Ashford whispered, her voice barely audible above the thunder, "you don't know what you're asking." Maria's knees nearly buckled with relief when the old woman stepped aside. The foyer of the Victorian mansion was a cavern of shadows and peeling wallpaper, but it was dry. That was enough, more than enough. "I can fix anything," Maria said, following Mrs. Ashford's shuffling footsteps deeper into the house. "Plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. My father taught me before he died. I just need a place to stay until the baby comes." Mrs. Ashford paused at the bottom of a grand staircase, her fingers trailing along the banister's carved mahogany. "No one's lived in the upper floors for 20 years, not since my husband passed. There are things up there, memories better left undisturbed." The baby kicked hard against Maria's ribs, and she winced. She'd felt the contractions starting that afternoon, not labor, not yet, but her body's warning that time was running short. She needed shelter, needed rest, needed hope. "I understand about memories," Maria said softly. "Sometimes fixing what's broken helps heal what hurts." The old woman's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence, searched Maria's face. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Maria nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. She was running from Marcus, from his fists, from his screaming rage when he found out about the baby, from the eviction notice and empty bank account he'd left her with when he disappeared into the night. "We all have our demons," Mrs. Ashford said finally. "Come, I'll show you to the servants' quarters. They're small, but they're clean." As they walked through the mansion's maze of corridors, Maria catalogued the decay around her. Water damage had warped the hardwood floors, and wallpaper hung in strips like dead skin. The electrical outlets were ancient, probably installed in the 1940s. This wasn't just a house in need of repair, it was a monument to neglect. "Mrs. Ashford," she said carefully, "when did you last have work done on the house?" The old woman stopped at a narrow door beside the kitchen. "My late husband, God rest his soul, he was particular about strangers. After he passed, I couldn't afford to hire anyone I trusted. The house has been dying around me ever since." She opened the door to reveal a small but spotless room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto the overgrown garden. It was more than Maria had dared to hope for. "There's a bathroom down the hall," Mrs. Ashford continued. "Kitchen's yours to use. I don't eat much these days. In exchange—" She gestured vaguely at the crumbling walls around them. "I'll start tomorrow," Maria promised. "I'll begin with the worst damage and work my way through room by room." Mrs. Ashford nodded, then hesitated in the doorway. "Child, there's something you should know. This house, it has a history. My husband's family, they weren't always honest people. If you start poking around in places that have been sealed up, you might find things that are better left alone." Maria settled carefully onto the narrow bed, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "I'm just here to fix what's broken. Nothing more." But as Mrs. Ashford's footsteps faded down the hallway and the mansion settled into its nighttime creaks and whispers, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple home repair job. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, old secrets stirred like sleeping giants waiting to be awakened by an unsuspecting hand. The Victorian mansion loomed against the grey October sky like something from a Gothic novel, its gabled roof punctuated by missing shingles and its wraparound porch sagging under the weight of decades. Maya Chen pulled her Honda Civic to the curb, the engine coughing before falling silent with what sounded like relief. She pressed a hand to her rounded belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. 6 months along, and already running out of options. The classified ad had been circled in red ink so many times the paper had worn thin. Handywoman sought for historic home restoration. Room and board provided for right candidate. The front gate hung askew on rusted hinges, and Maya had to lift it to swing it open. Dead leaves crunched under her work boots as she approached the front door, noting the peeling paint and loose porch boards. The brass doorbell was green with age, but when she pressed it, she heard a faint chiming somewhere deep within the house. Footsteps approached slowly, accompanied by the tap of a walking stick. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes the color of winter's storms. Despite her age, she held herself with unmistakable dignity, though Maya noticed how her fingers trembled slightly on the ornate door handle. "You must be Maya," the woman said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent Maya couldn't place. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. Please, come in." The interior took Maya's breath away. Even in its current state of genteel decay, the house spoke of old money and careful craftsmanship. A grand staircase curved upward, its mahogany banister worn smooth by generations of hands. Dusty crystal chandeliers caught what little light filtered through heavy curtains, casting prismatic shadows on wallpaper that had probably been elegant when Roosevelt was president. "It's beautiful," Maya said, and meant it. Eleanor's smile was sad. It was, once. "My late husband's family built this place in 1892. I've lived here for 43 years, but I'm afraid I can no longer maintain it properly." She gestured toward Maya's belly. "Are you certain you're up for this kind of work?" Maya straightened her shoulders. "I've been doing construction and renovation since I was 16. Pregnancy doesn't change what I know about plumbing and electrical work." "And the father?" The question hung in the air between them. Maya had prepared for this, but it still stung. "He's not in the picture. It's just me and the baby." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Sometimes that's for the best. Come, let me show you what needs doing." They spent the next hour walking through rooms that seemed frozen in time. Eleanor pointed out leaking pipes, faulty wiring, and windows that no longer sealed properly. The furnace wheezed like an old dog, and several radiators had given up entirely. Maya took notes, her contractor's mind already calculating materials and labor. "The roof needs attention before winter," Eleanor said, as they climbed to the second floor. "And I'm afraid some of the foundation work is beyond my budget." Maya paused on the landing, studying a water stain that spread across the ceiling like a rust-colored continent. "What exactly is your budget?" "Modest," Eleanor admitted. "My husband left me comfortable but not wealthy. Most of our assets were tied up in the house itself." They reached the third floor, where Eleanor showed her a spacious room with slanted ceilings and dormer windows overlooking the street. "This would be yours. It has its own bathroom, though the shower needs some attention." Maya walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood of aging homes and towering oak trees. It was quiet here, peaceful in a way her cramped apartment near the highway had never been. "What about meals? I cook every day. Old habits. I'd welcome the company." Something in the older woman's voice made Maya turn. Eleanor stood in the doorway, and for a moment she looked every one of her 70-odd years, small and alone in the big empty house. "How long since your husband passed?" Maya asked gently. 3 years this December. The winters are the hardest. Maya made her decision. I'll need to give notice at my apartment and arrange for my tools to be moved. I can start Monday. Eleanor's face brightened considerably. Truly? Oh, my dear, you have no idea what a relief this is. As they shook hands, Maya noticed how cold Eleanor's fingers were, and how the older woman's eyes seemed to dart nervously toward the windows, as if she were expecting someone. Is everything all right? Maya asked. Eleanor hesitated, then forced a smile. Of course. Just an old woman's nerves. This neighborhood isn't what it used to be. But as Maya walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor Whitmore was afraid of something more specific than a changing neighborhood. The way she'd looked over her shoulder, the double locks on the front door, the careful way she'd avoided certain topics. Maya started her car, already mentally cataloguing what she'd need for the job ahead. Whatever Eleanor's secrets were, they weren't Maya's concern. She had her own problems to solve. She had no idea how wrong she was. The floorboards groaned under Maya's weight as she climbed to the second floor, her hand gripping the banister that wobbled with each step. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through grimy windows, and she could hear Mrs. Blackwood puttering around in the kitchen below, humming an old melody that seemed to echo through the walls like a ghost. Maya pushed open the first door she encountered and gasped. The room was a shrine to decay, wallpaper peeling in long strips, water stains blooming across the ceiling like dark flowers, and furniture draped in white sheets that had yellowed with age. But beneath the neglect, she could see the bones of something beautiful. Crown molding carved with intricate roses, hardwood floors that would gleam if properly restored, and tall windows that would flood the space with light once cleaned. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, making mental notes. The electrical work alone would take weeks, and she'd need to check the plumbing before winter set in. Her baby shifted inside her, a gentle reminder of the timeline she was racing against. The next room revealed more of the same, gorgeous architecture suffocating under decades of neglect. As she documented each space, Maya began to feel something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. This project could work. Mrs. Blackwood clearly needed the help, and Maya needed the stability. It was perfect, almost too perfect. She was photographing a particularly elaborate light fixture when she noticed it, a section of wallpaper that hung differently than the rest, as if it had been recently disturbed. Curiosity overrode caution, and she gently pulled at the loose edge. The paper came away easily, revealing bare plaster underneath. But carved into that plaster, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were numbers. March 7th, 1847. Maya's heart quickened. The house had been built in 1847, according to the historical marker outside. But what did the other numbers mean? Finding anything interesting up there, dear? Mrs. Blackwood's voice from the doorway made Maya jump. She quickly smoothed the wallpaper back into place, hoping the elderly woman hadn't noticed. Just getting a sense of the work needed, Maya replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. The foundation seems solid, but there's quite a bit to do. Mrs. Blackwood nodded, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or something deeper. This was my daughter's room, she said quietly. Sarah. She would have loved to see it restored. Would have? She passed 5 years ago. Cancer. Mrs. Blackwood's fingers traced the doorframe. Left me all alone in this big old place. Sometimes I think I hear her footsteps in the halls at night. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. She couldn't imagine losing a child, couldn't fathom the grief that would follow such a loss. I'm so sorry. She always said this house had secrets, Mrs. Blackwood continued, almost as if talking to herself. Used to spend hours exploring, looking for hidden passages and treasure like something out of a storybook. Silly girl. But her voice was fond, not dismissive. Maya's pulse quickened. Did she ever find anything? Mrs. Blackwood's gaze sharpened slightly. Why do you ask? Just curious. Old houses like this often have interesting histories. Maya tried to sound casual, but she could feel sweat gathering at the base of her neck despite the cool air. For a long moment, the two women studied each other. Maya had the unsettling feeling that Mrs. Blackwood could see right through her, could sense the desperation that drove her here and the secrets she was already starting to uncover. "The house has been in my family for 3 generations," Mrs. Blackwood said finally. "My husband's family, that is. They were complicated people. Not all of their business dealings were what you might call legitimate." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Maya felt her mouth go dry. "What kind of business?" "The kind that attracts the wrong sort of attention, even now." Mrs. Blackwood moved to the window and peered through the grime at the street below. "I've lived here for 40 years, and there are still people who think this house owes them something. People who come knocking at odd hours, asking questions about things that happened long before you were born." Maya's blood chilled. "What kind of people?" "Dangerous ones." Mrs. Blackwood turned back to her, and Maya saw fear flickering in the old woman's eyes. "That's why I need someone here, someone I can trust. This house needs protecting, and so do its secrets." Before Maya could ask what she meant, Mrs. Blackwood was walking toward the stairs. "Come along, dear. Let me show you where you'll be sleeping. And Maya?" She paused at the top of the staircase. "Some things are better left buried. Remember that." As Maya followed her down the creaking stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple home renovation. The morning light filtering through the dusty windows revealed the true scope of what Maya had gotten herself into. The Victorian mansions stretched endlessly in every direction, each room more damaged than the last. Water stains bloomed across wallpaper like dark flowers, floorboards sagged under her feet, and the smell of mold hung thick in the air despite the October chill seeping through broken window seals. Mrs. Hartwell had left early for what she called errands in town, though Maya suspected the old woman simply couldn't bear to watch someone else handle her beloved home. The silence felt oppressive as Maya stood in the grand foyer, her notebook already filled with 3 pages of urgent repairs. She started with the obvious problems, documenting each leak, each loose banister, each electrical outlet that sparked when she tested it with her voltage meter. But as the hours passed, she began noticing details that didn't quite fit. Scratches along the baseboards that looked too deliberate to be accidental, sections of wallpaper that had been carefully reglued, hiding something underneath. Most puzzling was a series of small holes in the walls, each about the size of a pencil, scattered throughout the house with no apparent pattern. Maya was examining one such hole in the library when she heard the front door slam. Mrs. Hartwell's voice echoed through the halls, but she wasn't alone. A man's voice responded, low and urgent. "Told you this was a mistake, Eleanor. Having someone else in the house now, of all times." "Keep your voice down," Mrs. Hartwell hissed. "She's just a pregnant girl with nowhere to go. She won't be any trouble." Maya pressed herself against the library door, her heart racing. Through the gap, she could see Mrs. Hartwell's visitor, a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the crumbling mansion. "The Kozlov brothers were asking questions at the bank yesterday," the man continued, "about you, about the house. They know something, Eleanor, and if they find out you've got someone else poking around—" "The Kozlovs can go to hell," Mrs. Hartwell snapped. "I've been dealing with their family's threats for 30 years. Some pregnant handywoman isn't going to change anything." Maya's blood turned to ice. She'd heard of the Kozlov brothers. Everyone in the construction trade had. They were the kind of men who collected debts with baseball bats and made problems disappear permanently. What could Mrs. Hartwell possibly owe them? "This isn't about debts anymore," the man was saying. "Ever since Victor got out of prison, he's been obsessed. He thinks you know where his grandfather hid—" "I don't know anything," Mrs. Hartwell cut him off. "How many times do I have to tell you people that?" Maya strained to hear more, but their voices were moving toward the kitchen. She waited until she heard the distant murmur of conversation before creeping to the top of the main staircase. From there, she could just make out fragments of their discussion. "Searched this place a dozen times. Walls, floors, even the damn foundation. Has to be here somewhere." The conversation lasted another 20 minutes before Maya heard the front door close again. She waited, counting her heartbeats, until Mrs. Hartwell's footsteps faded toward the back of the house. Her hands were shaking as she returned to the library, but now she looked at the small holes with new understanding. Someone had been searching these walls systematically, probably for years. The scratches on the baseboards, the red-glued wallpaper, all evidence of a methodical hunt for something hidden within the house's bones. Maya thought about the man's words. Viktor Kozlov's grandfather had hidden something here, something valuable enough that people were still looking for it 3 decades later. Something worth threatening an elderly widow over. She should leave. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should pack her few belongings and disappear before the Kozlov brothers learned about her presence. But where could she go? Her truck had barely made it here, her bank account was nearly empty, and winter was coming fast. As if summoned by her thoughts, the baby kicked hard against her ribs. Maya pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the strong flutter of movement beneath her palm. In 4 months, this child would need a warm place to sleep, food, medical care, a future. Running away now meant condemning them both to poverty and desperation. But staying might mean something far worse. Maya looked around the library with fresh eyes, noting how the afternoon shadows fell across the built-in shelves, how certain sections of wall seemed slightly different from others. If the Kozlov family treasure was really hidden somewhere in this house, and if she could find it first. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was a construction worker, not a treasure hunter. But she knew buildings better than most people knew their own bodies. She understood how walls were built, where spaces could be hidden, how old houses kept their secrets. If something was here, she might actually be able to find it. The question was whether she'd live long enough to enjoy whatever she discovered. The floorboards groaned beneath Maya's feet as she descended into the mansion's basement, her flashlight cutting through cobwebs that hung like tattered curtains. The musty air pressed against her lungs, thick with decades of neglect and something else, something that made her skin crawl with unease. She'd been living in the Victorian for 3 weeks now, slowly earning Eleanor's trust through small repairs and gentle conversation. The old woman had warmed to her presence, even sharing stories about her late husband's mysterious business ventures. But tonight, Eleanor was at her weekly bridge game, leaving Maya alone to explore the house's forgotten corners. The basement stretched farther than she'd expected, with stone walls that seemed to absorb her flashlight beam. Boxes lined the perimeter, their contents spilling out in chaotic heaps. Old photographs, ledgers, and what looked like business correspondence dating back to the 1940s. Maya picked up a yellowed letter, squinting at the faded ink. The letterhead read, Castellano Import Company, and the signature at the bottom made her blood run cold, Vincent Castellano. She'd heard that name whispered in her neighborhood, always accompanied by nervous glances and quick changes of subject. The Castellanos had been Boston's most feared crime family before their empire crumbled in the 80s. What were their business papers doing in Eleanor's basement? A sudden creak from upstairs made Maya freeze. Eleanor wasn't supposed to return for hours, but the bridge game sometimes ended early. Maya quickly photographed the letter with her phone and continued deeper into the basement, her curiosity overriding her caution. Behind a stack of mouldering furniture, she discovered a door she hadn't noticed before. The wood was darker than the rest, newer, as if it had been installed long after the house was built. The handle turned easily in her hand. The room beyond was small, perhaps 8 feet square, with walls lined in what appeared to be lead sheeting. In the center sat an old safe, its black metal surface unmarked by rust despite the basement's humidity. Maya's pulse quickened. She'd spent enough time around her ex-boyfriend's criminal associates to recognize a serious piece of security equipment when she saw one. Another creak echoed from upstairs, followed by the distinct sound of the front door closing. Eleanor was home early. Maya switched off her flashlight and waited in the darkness, listening to the familiar shuffle of Eleanor's footsteps across the living room floor. The old woman moved with purpose, not the slow meander of someone preparing for bed. Instead, the footsteps headed directly toward the basement door. Panic flooded Maya's system. She was trapped in a room that Eleanor clearly didn't want discovered, holding evidence of connections to one of Boston's most notorious crime families. Her pregnancy made quick movement difficult, but she managed to squeeze behind a stack of boxes just as light spilled down the basement stairs. "I know you're down there, dear." Eleanor's voice carried a tone Maya had never heard before. Cold, calculating, nothing like the frail widow who'd been teaching her to make proper tea. "There's no point hiding. We need to have a conversation." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly, protecting the life growing inside her. She thought about the broken window latch upstairs, the one she'd been meaning to repair. If she could reach the main basement, she might be able to climb out through one of the small windows near the ceiling. Eleanor's footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the beam of a much stronger flashlight than Maya's. "You're probably wondering about those papers you found. About Vincent. He was my first husband, you know. Before Harold. Before I became the respectable widow everyone thinks they know." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Eleanor Blackwood had been Eleanor Castellano. The sweet old woman who'd offered her shelter was the widow of a crime boss. "Vincent hid something in this house before he died," Eleanor continued, her voice now directly outside the hidden room. "Something worth more than either of us could spend in a lifetime. I've been looking for it for 30 years, but these old hands aren't what they used to be. Then you showed up, young and desperate, and willing to tear apart my house for repairs." Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her mind racing. She'd been set up from the beginning. Eleanor hadn't offered her shelter out of kindness. She'd been recruiting free labor to help search for whatever Vincent had hidden. "I know you're scared, and I understand why." Eleanor's voice softened slightly. "But we can help each other. You need money for that baby, and I need someone young enough to do what needs to be done. Vincent left clues scattered throughout this house. Help me find what he hid, and I'll give you enough to disappear, to start fresh somewhere safe." The offer hung in the air like a poisoned apple. Maya knew she was cornered, but she also knew that people who made deals with crime families rarely lived to enjoy their profits. Her baby kicked, a small flutter that reminded her exactly what was at stake. The basement fell silent, except for the sound of two women breathing in the darkness, each waiting for the other to make the first move. The morning light filtered through the dust-moated air as Sarah carefully descended the narrow stairs, her hand gripping the banister. She'd barely slept after discovering the money, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. The weight of the discovery pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. She found Eleanor in the kitchen, standing at the old porcelain sink with her back rigid. The elderly woman didn't turn when Sarah entered, but her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, uncertain. The question hung between them like a blade. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized Eleanor knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. "Eleanor, 43 years. Eleanor finally turned, her pale eyes sharp as winter ice. 43 years I've lived in this house, and you think I don't know every creak, every whisper of movement?" She dried her hands on a faded dish towel, each motion deliberate. "The attic stairs sang your weight at 3 in the morning. Sarah's mouth went dry. "I was just looking around?" "Yes, I imagine you were." Eleanor moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 78 years. "The question is, what did you find?" The baby kicked, a sharp jab against Sarah's ribs that made her wince. She pressed a hand to her stomach, buying time, but Eleanor's gaze never wavered. "I found some old boxes," Sarah said carefully. "Family things, it looked like. Family things." Eleanor's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Is that what you call it?" The words cracked something open in Sarah's chest. She pulled out a chair and sat across from Eleanor, the worn wooden table between them like a negotiating surface. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked. "Known what, exactly?" About the money. Eleanor's face didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. So there it is. The truth finally crawling out of its hole. You've known all along. Known. Child, I've been living with that knowledge like a tumor for 43 years. Every day wondering if today would be the day someone would come looking. Every night jumping at shadows. Eleanor's voice cracked. And then you arrived, desperate and pregnant, and I thought... She shook her head. I thought maybe it would finally end with something good. Sarah leaned forward. What happened? Where did it come from? Eleanor was quiet for so long, Sarah wondered if she'd answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My husband found it. 1981. He was renovating the attic after we bought the house, and there it was, hidden in the walls like some terrible secret. She looked up at Sarah. We tried to do the right thing. Went to the police, reported it. But they said without knowing where it came from, there was nothing they could do. Told us to keep it safe and they'd investigate. And 3 months later, someone broke in, ransacked the place, turned over every stick of furniture. We weren't home, thank God, but Harold, my husband, he was so shaken. We realized someone knew. Someone was looking. Sarah felt cold despite the morning warmth creeping through the windows. Did they find anything? Harold had hidden most of it, moved it around piece by piece every few months, became obsessed with it, said we couldn't spend it, couldn't get rid of it, couldn't trust anyone with it. Eleanor's eyes grew distant. It consumed him, us, our marriage, everything. But you kept it. What choice did we have? Harold said if we tried to turn it in again, whoever was looking might come back, might hurt us. And if we spent it, she shrugged helplessly. We were teachers, Sarah. How do you explain suddenly having money? Sarah's mind raced. 3 generations of criminals, the newspaper had said. This could be connected to any number of crimes, spanning decades. Harold died 8 years ago, Eleanor continued. Heart attack. I think the stress of keeping that secret just ate him alive. She looked directly at Sarah. I've been waiting for someone to find it ever since. Waiting for this burden to become someone else's problem. Is that why you let me stay? Because you hoped I'd find it? Eleanor's smile was sad and tired. I let you stay because I remembered what it felt like to be desperate. But yes, part of me hoped. She paused. I'm 78 years old, Sarah. I don't have children, don't have grandchildren. When I die, this house will go to some distant cousin who'll probably tear it down. That money has done nothing but bring misery for 43 years. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time for it to do some good instead. The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the old wall clock and the distant sound of traffic. Sarah stared at Eleanor, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night of her life. The attic felt different in the morning light filtering through dust-moated air. Sarah climbed the narrow stairs with deliberate steps, her heart hammering against her ribs as she approached the loose floorboard where she'd hidden the photograph. The old house creaked around her, settling into another day of keeping its secrets. She pried up the board with shaking fingers and retrieved the faded image. In daylight, the faces seemed even more haunting. The young woman's defiant stare, the baby's innocent expression, both frozen in a moment that had somehow led to violence and decades of searching. A car door slammed outside. Sarah scrambled to the grimy window and peered through the glass. A black sedan sat in the driveway, and a man in an expensive coat was walking toward the front door. Even from above, she could see the predatory confidence in his stride. The doorbell chimed through the house, followed by Eleanor's shuffling footsteps. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear the conversation below. Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Vincent Torrino. I believe we need to discuss some family history. The name hit Sarah like ice water. Torrino. She'd heard that name whispered in the corridors of the women's shelter, always with fear. A family that collected debts in blood and buried their mistakes in concrete. I don't know what you're talking about. Eleanor's voice carried up the stairs, thin but steady. I think you do. My grandfather spent his whole life looking for something that belonged to him, something that ended up in this house 70 years ago. Sarah clutched the photograph tighter. The baby in the picture, it had to be Eleanor. But that would make Vincent Torrino the great-grandson of the man who'd come looking for answers all those years ago. "Your grandfather was a thug who terrorized decent people," Eleanor said, and Sarah heard steel in the old woman's voice she'd never noticed before. Vincent's laugh was cold. "Maybe, but he was a thug who got robbed, and my family has long memories. We know about the girl who worked for the Pemberton family. We know she took something that didn't belong to her when she ran. Even if that were true, what makes you think I'd know anything about it?" "Because you are that girl, Elena Vasquez. You just changed your name, got married, and thought you could hide in this rotting mansion forever." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. Eleanor, had been the woman in the photograph, the desperate girl with the baby who'd somehow crossed one of the most dangerous criminal families in the city. "That girl died a long time ago," Eleanor said quietly. "Did she? Or did she just get old and think the world forgot? My family doesn't forget, Mrs. Whitmore. We've been watching this house for months, waiting for the right moment. And now we hear you've got some pregnant girl staying here doing repairs. Funny coincidence, don't you think? History repeating itself." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly. They knew about her. How long had she been walking around the property, completely unaware that eyes were watching from the shadows? "Leave her out of this," Eleanor said sharply. "That depends on what you tell me about what my great-grandfather lost. He kept detailed records, you see. Every transaction, every debt, every theft. According to his books, the Pembertons were holding something worth a fortune when their house burned down. But the insurance investigators found the safe empty." Sarah heard footsteps on the wooden floors below, Vincent pacing or perhaps looking around the front room. "You worked for them," he continued. "You had access. And 3 days after the fire, you disappeared with your baby and never came back to the neighborhood. My great-grandfather spent decades looking for you. Your great-grandfather was a loan shark who preyed on immigrants," Eleanor shot back. "If something went missing, he probably deserved to lose it." The silence stretched long enough that Sarah began to worry something had happened. Then Vincent spoke again, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "I'm going to make this simple. You have 48 hours to tell me where it is. If you cooperate, you and your little pregnant friend can walk away from this. If you don't—" He let the threat hang in the air. Sarah heard the front door open and close, then the car engine starting up outside. She waited until the sound faded before creeping down the stairs. She found Eleanor in the front room, sitting heavily in her armchair and staring at the wall where the family photographs hung. The old woman looked smaller somehow, as if Vincent's visit had stripped away years of careful defenses. "Eleanor," Sarah said softly. The old woman turned, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I knew this day would come eventually. I just hoped—" She shook her head. "I'm sorry, dear. I never meant for you to get caught up in this." Sarah sat down across from her, still clutching the photograph. "What did you take from them?" Eleanor's gaze fell to the picture in Sarah's hands, and her face went white. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her from across decades. Eleanor stood in the center, young and radiant in a beaded dress, flanked by 2 men who looked nothing like the respectable businessmen their poses suggested. The taller one had cold eyes and a thin smile that made Sarah's skin crawl even through the sepia tones. "That's Vincent Torrino," Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of buried secrets. "And his brother Marcus. They were business partners of my late husband." Sarah's breath caught. She'd heard whispers of the Torrino name in her research about the house's history, but always dismissed them as local folklore. "Business partners?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Charles liked to call it that, made it sound legitimate. She moved to the window, her arthritic fingers gripping the curtain. "They were bootleggers, dear. During Prohibition, this house was their headquarters for the entire northeastern operation." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing Sarah's sudden spike of adrenaline. She pressed a hand to her belly, trying to process what she was hearing. But the money in the walls was never Charles's to begin with. Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He skimmed it from their operations for months before they caught on. When they came for him that night in 1952, he'd already hidden it throughout the house. Told me it was insurance, that they'd never hurt me as long as I didn't know where it was. Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. But you did know. Not then. I found the first cash years later, completely by accident, then more over the decades. I never spent it, never touched it. I was too afraid. Eleanor turned back to face her, tears glistening in her clouded eyes. The Torrinos have been watching this house ever since, waiting. 3 generations of them, convinced the money was still here. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The men who'd been following Sarah. The feeling of being watched. The questions at the hardware store. They know about me, she said, her voice barely audible. They know someone's been working on the house, making repairs they couldn't make while I was alone here. Eleanor moved closer, urgency creeping into her tone. Vincent's grandson, Anthony, he's been sniffing around for weeks. His father died in prison, still believing that money was hidden here. Now Anthony thinks he's finally close. Sarah's mind raced. The cash she'd already found could change everything for her and the baby. But if Eleanor was right, taking it meant painting a target on their backs. How much is there? Charles told me it was close to $500,000. In 1952 money. Eleanor's words hit like a physical blow. In today's terms, enough to kill for, Sarah finished. Enough that they've already killed for it. Charles wasn't the first to die, and he won't be the last if Anthony finds what he's looking for. A sound from outside made both women freeze, the distinctive creak of the front gate. Sarah moved to the window and peered through the heavy curtains. A black sedan sat at the curb, engine running. Even from the second floor, she could see the silhouette of a man behind the wheel, watching the house. "We need to call the police," Sarah whispered. Eleanor shook her head sadly. "With what proof? That we suspect a man of sitting in his car on a public street?" She joined Sarah at the window. "Besides, the Torrinos have always been careful about having friends in useful places." The baby shifted again, and Sarah felt a sharp pain in her lower back. The stress was taking its toll. She was barely 6 months along, but the constant tension and physical labor were wearing on her body. If something happened to her now, there might be another way. Eleanor said slowly, as if reading her thoughts. Charles kept records, not of the money, but of everything else. Names, dates, transactions. He was terrified they'd turn on him, so he documented everything as insurance. Where are these records? Hidden, with the money. He scattered everything, thinking it would keep him safe. Eleanor's voice carried old pain. Fat lot of good it did him. Sarah watched the car below, her mind churning through possibilities. The money could give her child every advantage she'd never had. College, security, choices. But it could also make them both targets for people who'd proven they had no qualms about violence. The sedan's door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from this distance, Sarah could see he was young, well-dressed, and moved with the confident stride of someone used to getting what he wanted. He stood for a long moment, studying the house with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Then he smiled, tipped an imaginary hat toward their window, and got back in his car. The message was clear. He knew they were watching, and he wanted them to know he was watching back. The scream that tore from Maya's throat echoed through the mansion's halls as she stumbled backward from the hidden compartment. Behind the false wall, skeletal remains sat propped against what appeared to be ledgers and documents, the skull grinning at her with empty sockets. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the opposite wall, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Just bones," she whispered to herself, forcing steady breaths. "Just old bones." But as her initial terror subsided, curiosity crept in. The skeleton wore the tattered remains of what had once been an expensive suit, and a corroded pistol lay beside the yellowed papers. Maya approached slowly, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the grisly discovery. The ledgers were filled with meticulous handwriting in faded ink, names, dates, and amounts that made her eyes widen. Gambling debts, loan sharking operations, and detailed records of what could only be described as a criminal empire spanning decades. The most recent entries were dated 1987, just 2 years before Eleanor's husband had died. Thomas Whitmore. Maya read from an identification card tucked into the skeleton's jacket pocket. The photo showed a thin man with sharp features and cold eyes. According to the dates, he would have been in his 50s when he died, sealed away in this hidden room. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know you're inside. Time's running out." Maya's blood turned to ice. She grabbed the most important-looking documents and stuffed them into her jacket, then carefully made her way back through the passage. The house felt different now, charged with menace. Every creak of the old wood made her jump. As she emerged into the parlor, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine outside. Through the lace curtains, she saw a black sedan pulling up to the curb. 2 figures emerged, moving with purposeful determination toward the front door. Panic flooded her system. She was trapped on the 2nd floor with nowhere to run. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress, and Maya placed a protective hand over her stomach. She had to think, had to survive this for both of them. The front door rattled as someone tested the lock. Then came the scratching sound of lockpicks working. Maya crept toward the window, calculating the distance to the oak tree whose branches nearly touched the house. In her condition, the jump was impossible. Heavy footsteps entered the foyer below. "Check every room," a gravelly voice commanded. "She's here somewhere, and she's got what we need." Maya slipped into Eleanor's bedroom and quietly closed the door, turning the old-fashioned key in the lock. It wouldn't hold them long, but it might buy her precious minutes. She pulled out her phone to call 911, but the screen showed no signal. The documents, the money, it's all connected, she realized, pulling out the papers she'd taken from the hidden room. Thomas Whitmore hadn't just been killed and hidden away. He'd been the keeper of records that could destroy powerful people, people who were still alive, still dangerous. The footsteps were on the stairs now, accompanied by low voices. Maya caught fragments. 40 years we've been looking, and old lady must have known. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, gripping a heavy crystal vase from Eleanor's dresser. The doorknob turned, followed by frustrated rattling when the lock held. "Break it down," came the order. The first shoulder strike against the door made the old wood splinter. Maya's mind raced through her options. The window led to certain death in her condition. The closet was an obvious hiding place. She looked up at the ornate ceiling medallion and noticed something she'd missed before, a small access panel. Another strike. The door frame began to give way. Moving faster than she'd thought possible, Maya dragged Eleanor's vanity chair beneath the panel and climbed up. The access opened into a narrow crawl space between floors, barely wide enough for her swollen body. She pulled herself up just as the bedroom door exploded inward. Through gaps in the old floorboards, she watched 2 men search the room with practiced efficiency. One was tall and lean with silver hair, moving with the careful precision of age. The other was younger, built like a boxer, with scarred knuckles and predatory eyes. "She was here," the older man said, examining the displaced dust on the vanity chair. "Can't have gone far. Maybe she found another hiding spot," the younger one suggested. "This old place is full of secrets." The older man's phone rang. "What? Are you certain?" A pause. "No, we can't leave yet. We're too close." He hung up and turned to his partner. "The rest of the family is getting nervous. They want this finished tonight." Maya bit her lip to keep from gasping. Family. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about secrets that had been festering for generations. And she was carrying the evidence that could expose them all if she lived long enough to use it. The rain hammered against the mansion's windows as Sarah pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the cellar, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might give her away. Above, heavy footsteps creaked across the floorboards in a methodical pattern, like a predator stalking its prey. She'd barely made it down the servants' staircase when she heard the front door splinter. 3 men, maybe 4, had entered with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Their voices carried through the old house's thin walls, gruff, impatient, dangerous. "Check every room," one commanded. "She's here somewhere." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. The baby had been restless all evening, as if sensing her mother's fear. Now, thankfully, it had settled into stillness. She closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing, remembering what Margaret had told her about the house's secrets. The fortune wasn't just money, it was leverage, evidence that could destroy powerful people, carefully collected by Margaret's late husband during his years as a city councilman. Harold Whitmore hadn't been the gentle public servant everyone believed. He'd been documenting corruption, building an insurance policy that had kept him and Margaret safe for decades. But now Margaret was gone, and the wolves had finally come calling. A door slammed somewhere above, followed by the sound of furniture being overturned. They were searching systematically, growing more frustrated with each empty room. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before they found the cellar entrance. She felt along the stone wall until her fingers found the loose brick Margaret had shown her. Behind it was a key, not to the safe she'd already found, but to something else entirely. Margaret's final secret, shared in those last delirious moments before the ambulance arrived. "The foundation," Margaret had whispered, her grip surprisingly strong on Sarah's wrist. Harold built more than a house. He built a fortress. The key was ice-cold in Sarah's palm. She moved carefully through the cellar's maze of support beams and forgotten furniture, counting her steps in the darkness. 15 paces from the east wall, then 5 north. Her searching hands found what felt like a wooden panel set flush against the stone foundation. The key slid into a hidden lock with a soft click that seemed to echo like thunder in the confined space. The panel swung inward, revealing a passage so narrow she'd have to turn sideways to fit through it. The musty air that rushed out carried the scent of secrets long buried. Above her, the footsteps had grown more urgent. She heard one man curse colorfully as something crashed to the floor. They'd found the cellar door. Sarah squeezed into the passage, pulling the panel closed behind her just as light began filtering down the cellar stairs. The space was barely wide enough for her pregnant form, but it led upward at a gentle incline. Her fingertips traced the rough stone walls as she climbed in absolute darkness, each step carefully placed to avoid making noise. The passage ended at another panel, this one opening into what she realized was the space behind Margaret's bedroom closet. She could hear the intruders directly below now, their flashlight beams dancing through the cellar as they searched every corner. Margaret's bedroom felt different in the moonlight filtering through rain-streaked windows. Emptier somehow, as if the old woman's spirit had finally found peace. Sarah moved to the antique secretary desk in the corner, the one piece of furniture the men hadn't disturbed in their earlier search of the house. The key fit a tiny lock in the desk's secret compartment. Inside, she found what Harold Whitmore had really left behind, not just evidence of others' crimes, but documentation of where the real fortune was hidden. Bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, safety deposit box locations in 3 different states, investment portfolios that had been growing untouched for 30 years. But there was something else. A letter addressed to whoever finds this, written in Margaret's careful script. Sarah's hands trembled as she read by moonlight. "If you're reading this, it means the vultures have finally come home to roost. Harold always said this day would arrive. The money is yours now, child. Use it wisely. The tunnel leads to the carriage house, then to the old storm drain. You can reach the street without being seen. Take only what you need from the safe. They'll tear the house apart looking for the rest, never knowing it was never here to begin with. May God forgive us all for the choices we've made." A crash from downstairs told Sarah they'd found the loose brick. Soon they'd discover the passage. She stuffed the documents into her jacket and moved toward the bedroom's window. The carriage house was only 30 yards away across the overgrown garden, but it might as well have been 30 miles. The baby stirred restlessly as Sarah prepared to run for both their lives. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Sarah spread its contents across Eleanor's kitchen table. Photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes created a timeline of violence that stretched back 70 years. Her hands trembled as she picked up a police report dated 1953. The ink faded, but still legible enough to make her stomach turn. Vincent Caruso, 34, found deceased in his automobile. Multiple gunshot wounds. Investigation ongoing. Below that, a handwritten note in the margin knew about the insurance money. Had to be silenced. Eleanor sat across from her, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. My father was meticulous about documentation. He said it was insurance of its own kind. If anything happened to him, there would be a record. Sarah flipped through more photographs. Crime scenes, mugshots, surveillance photos taken from a distance. The faces changed, but the violence remained constant. How many people died because of this money? 17 that we know of. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. The Torrino family, the Carusos, independents who got too close to the truth. When organized crime fractured in the 60s, it got worse. Everyone was fighting everyone else, and my father's fortune became legend. A photograph slipped from Sarah's fingers, landing face up on the table. A young woman, maybe 20, lay crumpled at the bottom of a staircase. The caption read, "Maria Santos, survived by infant daughter." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "This has to stop," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We can't keep this money. It's cursed." Eleanor reached across the table and touched Sarah's wrist. "That money is the only reason you're still alive. Tommy Benedetto isn't going to stop hunting for it, and neither will the others. If we give it up now, we lose our only bargaining chip." The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. Sarah had felt stronger these past few days, the pregnancy progressing normally despite the stress. But looking at these photographs, seeing the trail of bodies left in the fortune's wake, she wondered if any amount of money was worth the risk. A car door slammed outside. Both women froze. Eleanor's eyes went to the window, then back to Sarah. "Are you expecting anyone?" Sarah shook her head, already gathering the documents. They'd established a routine. Any unexpected visitors meant the evidence went into the hidden compartment, behind the false panel in the kitchen cabinet. She stuffed papers and photos into the envelope, while Eleanor peered through the curtains. "Police car," Eleanor murmured. "One officer." Sarah's heart hammered as she sealed the hiding spot and arranged herself at the table with a notebook and measuring tape, playing the part of a contractor taking measurements. Eleanor opened the front door before the officer could knock. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Officer Martinez. I wanted to follow up on the break-in report from last week." Sarah caught fragments of conversation as they spoke on the porch. Standard questions about missing items, whether anything new had been disturbed, if they'd noticed any suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Eleanor's responses were calm, practiced. When they returned to the kitchen, Officer Martinez nodded politely at Sarah. "Contractor, Sarah's been helping me with some repairs," Eleanor explained. "The house is old, and I'm not as young as I used to be." The officer's gaze swept the kitchen, taking in Sarah's tools and the architectural sketches she'd spread on the table. His expression was professional but not suspicious. "Any problems with the work?" Sometimes renovation projects attract unwanted attention from thieves looking for valuable materials or cash payments. Sarah's mouth went dry, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Nothing like that. Mostly just fixing what's broken." After Officer Martinez left, they sat in silence for several minutes. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. "That wasn't routine," Eleanor said finally. "Someone called in a tip." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They're watching us." Eleanor nodded grimly. "The question is who? Could be Benedetto's people. Could be the police acting on information. Could be someone else entirely. The money has a way of bringing people out of the woodwork." Sarah felt trapped between impossible choices. Keep the money and stay a target, or give it up and lose the only protection they had. Every option led to violence, and she was running out of time. The baby would come in less than 3 months, and she couldn't raise a child while looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. "There has to be another way," she said. Eleanor's smile was sad and knowing. That's what my father thought, what Vincent Caruso thought, what all 17 of those people thought. She gestured toward the hidden panel. "Sometimes there isn't another way. Sometimes you just have to choose which devil you can live with." The basement felt different now, charged with secrets that made the air thick and oppressive. Sarah's hands trembled as she traced the edges of the loose floorboard she'd discovered behind the furnace, her flashlight beam wavering across the worn wood. 3 days had passed since Marcus's visit, 3 days of pretending normalcy while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. The board creaked as she pried it up with the crowbar she'd found in Eleanor's toolbox. Beneath lay a space barely 2 feet square, lined with yellowed newspaper from 1962. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached inside, her fingers closing around something wrapped in oilcloth. The package was heavier than expected, roughly the size of a shoebox, but dense with promise. Sarah's breath caught as she unwrapped it, revealing stacks of bills bound with rubber bands that crumbled at her touch. But these weren't just any bills. They were crisp, hundreds, 50s, 20s, all bearing dates from the early 1960s. Underneath the money lay a leather journal, its pages brittle with age. Sarah opened it carefully, squinting at the faded handwriting in the dim light. The entries began in 1961, written in Eleanor's younger hand. "Father's associates came again today. They don't know he told me about the arrangement before he died. They think I'm just the grieving daughter, too simple to understand. If they only knew what I've been watching, what I've been planning." Sarah's pulse quickened as she read further. "Moved the package today. Let them tear apart the attic and the walls. They'll never think to look where I put it. The Castellis and their hired thugs can search for decades. I'll wait. I'll outlive them all if I have to." The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her mother's agitation. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly and continued reading. Entry after entry detailed Eleanor's careful game of misdirection, her deliberate hints about hidden compartments and secret passages, all designed to keep the searchers occupied while the real treasure lay forgotten beneath the basement floor. The final entry was dated just 2 months ago. "They're getting desperate. The old generation is dying off, but the young ones are more dangerous. I can feel my time running short. If something happens to me, I pray someone worthy finds this, someone who needs it more than those vultures ever did." Sarah closed the journal with shaking hands. The money, there had to be at least $50,000, maybe more, represented everything she'd dreamed of. Prenatal care without worry about the bills, a safe place for her baby, security she'd never known. But Eleanor's words echoed in her mind, "The young ones are more dangerous." A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the cadence. Marcus had returned, and he wasn't alone. She quickly rewrapped the money and journal, clutching them to her chest as voices drifted down through the floorboards. 2 men, maybe 3, their words indistinct but their tone unmistakably threatening. "Basement next. Should have checked it more thoroughly last time. Old lady was clever, I'll give her that. But everyone makes mistakes." Sarah's mind raced. The basement had only one exit, the stairs leading directly to the kitchen where the men waited. The small windows were painted shut and too narrow for escape, even if she weren't 7 months pregnant. She was trapped. Moving as quietly as possible, she replaced the floorboard and scattered dust over it to hide any evidence of disturbance. The money and journal she tucked inside her oversized sweater, praying the bulk wouldn't be noticeable in the dim light. Footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. Sarah positioned herself near the washing machine, holding a basket of Eleanor's old clothes, as if she'd been sorting through donations. Marcus appeared first, followed by 2 men she didn't recognize, one thin and nervous looking, the other built like a linebacker with dead eyes that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice carrying false warmth. Didn't expect to find you down here, Sarah. Just doing some cleaning? Mrs. Whitmore asked me to sort through things before I left, Sarah replied, proud that her voice remained steady. I'll be moving on soon. The repairs are nearly finished. The larger man stepped closer, studying her with unconcealed suspicion. Funny thing about old houses, they give up their secrets eventually, sometimes to the most unexpected people. Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. I wouldn't know anything about that. I'm just here to fix the roof and earn enough money to get back on my feet. Marcus exchanged glances with his companions. The thin man had already begun examining the walls and floor, his movements methodical and practiced. Of course you are, Marcus said softly. But maybe you've seen things, heard things. Old Eleanor was quite the talker in her final days. The weight of the money pressed against Sarah's ribs like a secret heartbeat, and she realized that whether she kept Eleanor's treasure or not, she might not live long enough for it to matter. The basement felt different now that Maya knew what lay beneath the false floor. Every creak of the old house above seemed amplified, every shadow deeper. She sat on the dusty steps, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her anxiety. Detective Rodriguez had left an hour ago with promises to increase patrol cars in the neighborhood, but Maya knew that wouldn't be enough. The Castellis had waited 3 generations for this money. A few police cars wouldn't deter them now. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know you found it. We can make this easy. Maya's hands shook as she deleted the message. She climbed back upstairs, locking the basement door behind her, though she knew it was a futile gesture. If they wanted in, they'd find a way. The Victorian's main floor felt cavernous around her. Afternoon light filtered through the tall windows she'd spent weeks cleaning, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors she'd lovingly restored. All that work, all those careful repairs, for what? She might not live to see the baby sleep in the nursery she'd planned upstairs. Another text, meet us at Riverside Park. Midnight. Come alone and bring half. Keep half for yourself. Everyone wins. Maya stared at the screen. Half would still be more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. Enough for the baby's future, for medical bills, for a real home somewhere far from here. But could she trust them to honor such a deal? She thought of Mrs. Chen's journals, of the fear that had consumed the old woman's final years. The Castellis had murdered before. They'd killed Thomas Chen for refusing to talk. What would stop them from killing her after they got what they wanted? The baby kicked hard, making her gasp. Maya pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling the strong movements beneath her skin. 7 months along now. If something happened to her tonight, would the baby survive? Her phone rang. Detective Rodriguez. Maya, we've got a problem. Vincent Castelli made bail 2 hours ago. What? Maya sank onto the couch. How is that possible? Good lawyer, family connections. I'm sorry, we're watching him, but you can't watch him every second. Maya finished the thought. She told Rodriguez about the texts. Don't even think about meeting them, Rodriguez said sharply. We can arrange protection. Safe house. How long? Forever? Maya stood and paced to the window, peering through the curtain. The street looked normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They'll never stop looking. After ending the call, Maya sat in the growing darkness. She hadn't turned on any lights, afraid to advertise her presence. The house settled around her with familiar groans and sighs. At 10 o'clock, she made her decision. Moving carefully in the darkness, Maya descended to the basement one more time. She pulled up the false floorboard and stared down at the weathered bags that held a fortune in cash and bonds, the money that had cost Thomas Chen his life, the money that might cost her hers. He pulled out one of the smaller bags, still containing more cash than most people saw in a lifetime. If she was going to die tonight, at least she wouldn't die empty-handed. But first, she had one more thing to do. Maya climbed to the second floor and entered Mrs. Chen's former bedroom. She'd avoided this room during most of her renovations, something about it feeling too personal, too sacred. Now she understood why. Behind the loose baseboard she'd noticed weeks ago, Maya found what she was looking for: Mrs. Chen's final journal, the one the police hadn't discovered, the one that detailed every threat, every break-in, every sleepless night spent wondering if the Castellas would finally come. On the last page, Mrs. Chen had written an address, a safety deposit box number, and a bank name in the city. She'd hidden something there, something she thought might protect her. It never had the chance. Maya photographed every page with her phone and uploaded them to a cloud storage account. Then she wrote a letter explaining everything: the journal, the money, the threats, and emailed it to Detective Rodriguez with a delayed send time of 1 a.m. At 11:30, Maya walked through the Victorian one last time. She touched the banister she'd sanded and stained, ran her fingers along the window frames she'd carefully caulked. The house felt like home in a way nowhere ever had before. The baby kicked again, and Maya whispered, "I'm trying to keep us both alive, little one. I'm trying." She grabbed her jacket and the bag of money, then stepped out into the cold October night. The park was only 6 blocks away, 6 blocks to walk into what might be her death. But as Maya stepped off the front porch, she wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about the safety deposit box, about Mrs. Chen's final secret, and about the possibility that the old woman had left behind one last surprise for the people who'd made her life a nightmare. The basement felt different now, thick with secrets that seemed to pulse from the stone walls. Maya's hands trembled as she traced the edges of the loose brick she'd discovered behind the furnace. The mortar crumbled away like ancient dust, revealing a hollow space that exhaled the musty breath of decades. Her flashlight beam caught something metallic nestled deep within the cavity. With careful fingers, she extracted a small tin box, its surface green with verdigris but still intact. The weight surprised her, heavier than it looked, with something solid shifting inside. The lid resisted her attempts to open it until she found a kitchen knife upstairs. The metal protested with a sharp screech before giving way, revealing contents that made her breath catch. Wrapped in oiled cloth lay a leather journal, its pages yellowed but legible, and beneath it a collection of small velvet pouches that clinked softly when she lifted them. Maya's heart hammered as she opened the first pouch. Diamonds spilled across her palm like captured starlight, each stone catching the flashlight's glow. The second pouch held emeralds, and the third contained what looked like rare coins, their surfaces etched with dates from the 1920s. But it was the journal that made her hands shake. Written in Eleanor's careful script, the pages detailed a story Maya could barely comprehend. The Whitmore family hadn't just been wealthy, they'd been involved in something far more dangerous. Eleanor's grandfather had been a fence for stolen goods during Prohibition, using the mansion's hidden passages to store contraband. The gems and coins were payment from jobs that had never been recovered. "They killed Papa for refusing to tell them where it was hidden," one entry read. "Mother made me swear never to speak of it, but I cannot take this secret to my grave. If something happens to me, I pray whoever finds this will understand the danger it represents." Maya's baby kicked hard as if sensing her distress. She pressed her hand to her belly, mind racing. This explained everything: why strangers kept appearing, why Tommy Chen had been so interested in the house, why she'd felt watched. The fortune she held could secure her child's future beyond her wildest dreams, but it came with a price written in blood. Footsteps creaked across the floor above. Maya's blood turned to ice. She'd locked all the doors, checked every window. Someone was in the house. She quickly rewrapped the gems, shoving them back into the tin box along with the journal. The footsteps moved methodically through the rooms, searching. Multiple sets, she realized with growing terror. At least 2 people, maybe more. The basement stairs groaned under someone's weight. Maya clicked off the flashlight and pressed herself against the furnace, clutching the tin box to her chest. Her pregnant form made hiding nearly impossible, but the basement's maze of support beams and stored furniture offered some concealment. A beam of light swept across the basement floor, followed by hushed voices. "Check every corner." It has to be down here somewhere. 80 years we've been looking for this. The old woman took the secret to her grave, but maybe her little house guest found something. Maya recognized one of the voices, Tommy Chen. The other belonged to a woman she didn't know, someone whose tone carried the cold certainty of violence. "She's been busy down here," the woman said. "Look at all this renovation work. Smart girl might have found more than she bargained for." Their flashlights swept closer to Maya's hiding spot. She held her breath, acutely aware that discovery meant death. The baby moved restlessly inside her, and she pressed her free hand to her belly, silently pleading for stillness. "Upstairs," Tommy said suddenly. "I heard something." The footsteps retreated, but Maya knew it was a trick. They suspected she was here, probably saw her car outside. This was a hunt, and she was the prey. She waited until the basement fell silent before moving. The tin box felt impossibly heavy as she crept toward the old coal chute she'd noticed during her earlier explorations. It was barely wide enough for her pregnant form, but it led outside to the garden. The metal door protested as she eased it open, rust flakes raining down. She squeezed through the narrow opening, the tin box clutched against her chest, and emerged into the cold night air behind an overgrown hedge. Her car was blocked by a black sedan she didn't recognize. Running wasn't an option in her condition, but she couldn't stay. They'd search the basement again more thoroughly, and next time they wouldn't be fooled. Maya made her choice. She tucked the tin box inside her jacket and began walking toward the woods behind the property. Eleanor's journal had mentioned an old groundskeeper's cottage somewhere in those trees, abandoned but possibly intact. Behind her, the mansion's windows blazed with searching light as her hunters realized their prey had escaped. The game had changed completely now. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying a secret worth killing for. The basement felt colder than Elena remembered, as if the earth itself had grown hostile to her presence. She descended the wooden steps carefully, one hand gripping the railing while the other rested protectively over her belly. The baby had been restless all morning, kicking and turning as though sensing the danger that surrounded them both. Marcus followed close behind, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead of her. They'd waited until Mrs. Holloway had fallen asleep before making their move, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman's eyes had been watching them from her bedroom window as they'd slipped out the kitchen door. "There," Elena whispered, pointing to the loose stones in the foundation wall. "Behind that section." Marcus knelt down and began working the stones free with the crowbar they'd brought from the garden shed. Each scrape of metal against stone seemed to echo through the basement like a gunshot. Elena winced with each sound, certain that someone would hear them, that Vincent Reeves would come bursting through the door at any moment. The first stone came free, then the second. Marcus reached into the hollow space, and his hand emerged clutching a canvas bag, heavy with the weight of its contents. Elena's heart pounded as he opened it, revealing stacks of bills, jewelry, and what appeared to be bearer bonds. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "There's got to be hundreds of thousands here, maybe more." Elena stared at the fortune that had cost so many people their lives, her grandfather's blood money, stolen and hidden away for decades, while people like Vincent Reeves and his family had killed for even a trace of its location. Now it sat before her, enough money to disappear completely, to give her child a life free from poverty and fear. But as Marcus reached for a second bag, Elena heard something that made her blood freeze, the soft creak of the basement door opening above them. They both went perfectly still. Marcus switched off his flashlight, plunging them into complete darkness. Elena's hand found his arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket as they listened to footsteps descending the wooden stairs. The beam of another flashlight swept across the basement, and Elena pressed herself against the foundation wall, praying that whoever was above them wouldn't look in their direction. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and began moving methodically through the basement, searching. "I know you're down here." Vincent Reeves's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Mrs. Holloway called me 20 minutes ago, said she saw lights in the basement window." Elena's heart sank. The old woman had betrayed them after all. "You've led me on quite a chase, Elena," Vincent continued, his footsteps growing closer. "But it's time to end this. Come out now and I'll make it quick. Keep hiding and I'll make sure you suffer before you die." Marcus's hand found the crowbar in the darkness. Elena could sense him preparing to make a move to try to protect her and the baby, but she also knew that Vincent wouldn't leave alone. Men like him always traveled with backup, and any confrontation would likely end with all three of them dead. The flashlight beam swept closer to their hiding spot. In seconds, they would be discovered. Then Elena heard something that changed everything. The sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Vincent heard them too, his footsteps stopping abruptly. "Damn it," he muttered. The sirens grew closer, and Elena realized that Mrs. Holloway hadn't called Vincent at all. The old woman had called the police. Either she'd finally decided to trust Elena, or she'd simply grown tired of having criminals invade her home. Either way, Vincent Reeves was about to have bigger problems than finding his grandfather's fortune. Vincent's footsteps moved quickly back toward the stairs. "This isn't over," he called out. "I'll find you, Elena. I'll find you and that baby of yours." The basement door slammed shut, and Elena heard the sound of Vincent's car starting in the driveway, tires squealing as he fled. The sirens were almost on top of them now. Marcus switched his flashlight back on, illuminating the bags of money scattered around them. "What do we do?" he asked. Elena looked at the fortune that had destroyed so many lives, then placed her hand over her belly where her child continued to kick and turn. She thought about her grandfather, about the choices he'd made and the legacy he'd left behind. She thought about the kind of life she wanted for her baby and what kind of person she wanted to be. "Help me put it back," she said quietly. "Elena, you're not thinking clearly. This money could—" "Help me put it back," she repeated, more firmly this time. "All of it." The sirens had reached the house now, red and blue lights flashing through the basement windows. Soon the police would be at the door, and Elena would have to explain everything. But for now, she worked alongside Marcus to return her grandfather's blood money to its hiding place in the wall. The basement felt different now, charged with the weight of discovery and desperation. Maya's hands trembled as she carefully lifted each bundle of bills from the hidden compartment, the musty air thick with decades of secrets finally coming to light. Behind her, Eleanor's breathing had grown shallow, each exhale a reminder that time was running out for more than just the treasure hunt. "There's so much," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the house's familiar creaks. The money felt surreal in her hands, crisp bills despite their age, bound with rubber bands that crumbled at her touch. "Eleanor, this could change everything." The old woman's eyes, though clouded with pain, remained sharp. "Count it quickly, dear. We need to know what we're dealing with." Maya's fingers worked frantically, separating the bundles into stacks. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the tension that filled the cramped space. 50,000, 100,000. The numbers climbed higher than anything she'd dared to imagine. By the time she reached the last bundle, her heart was racing. $430,000, she breathed. The figure hung in the air between them like a prayer and a curse. Eleanor closed her eyes. Herbert always said it was a fortune. I never believed the stories were real. A sudden crash from upstairs sent both women into frozen silence. Maya's blood turned to ice as heavy footsteps echoed through the floorboards above their heads. Not the careful, measured steps of someone exploring. These were the boots of someone who knew exactly where they were going. "They're inside," Eleanor whispered, her face pale in the dim light. Maya's mind raced through their options. The basement had only one exit, and it led straight into the kitchen where the intruders would be waiting. The small window near the ceiling was too high and too narrow for either of them to escape through, especially with Eleanor's condition and her own pregnancy limiting their mobility. "The old coal chute," Eleanor said urgently, reading Maya's thoughts. "Behind the furnace. It hasn't been used in 40 years, but it might still open to the side yard." More footsteps above, followed by the sound of furniture being overturned. Whoever was searching the house was being systematic and thorough. Maya grabbed as much of the money as she could stuff into her jacket, leaving the rest hidden in the compartment. Every instinct told her to take it all, but practicality won over greed. They moved as quietly as possible toward the ancient furnace, Eleanor leaning heavily on Maya's arm. The coal chute was a narrow metal slide, its opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Rust flaked off the hinges as Maya struggled to force it open, the metal protesting with sharp squeals that seemed deafeningly loud in the confined space. "You first," Eleanor insisted, but Maya shook her head. "I'm not leaving you here." "Maya, listen to me." Eleanor's grip on her arm was surprisingly strong. "That money represents 3 generations of people who have killed for it. If they find us both here, we're both dead. If you escape, you can call for help." The footsteps above had moved into the hallway directly over the basement stairs. Maya heard voices now, at least 2 men, possibly 3. They were discussing something in low, urgent tones that didn't carry clearly through the floorboards. "Go," Eleanor whispered fiercely. "Your baby needs you to be smart, not heroic." Maya squeezed through the coal chute opening, her pregnant belly barely fitting through the narrow space. The rusty metal scraped against her back as she wriggled forward, inch by painful inch. Behind her she heard Eleanor moving to conceal the chute opening again, covering their escape route. The chute opened into the side yard behind an overgrown hedge that provided perfect cover. Maya emerged into the cold night air, gasping and shaking. From inside the house she could hear the basement door opening, followed by heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs. Her phone had no signal in the side yard, forcing her to move further from the house. Every step took her away from Eleanor, and the guilt felt like a physical weight in her chest. She ducked behind the old garden shed and finally got enough bars to dial 911. "Police emergency," she whispered into the phone, giving the address and explaining that intruders were in the house with an elderly woman who needed medical attention. As she waited for help to arrive, Maya watched the house from her hiding spot. Lights moved from room to room as the search continued. Her jacket felt heavy with the weight of the stolen bills, and she realized that even if Eleanor was right about the money representing death and violence, she was already in too deep to turn back. The sound of sirens in the distance brought both relief and a new kind of terror. Once the police arrived, everything would change. There would be questions she couldn't answer, evidence she couldn't explain, and choices that would determine not just her future, but her child's survival. The basement stairs groaned under Sarah's weight as she descended into the Victorian's depths one final time. Her hands trembled against the rough stone walls, more from exhaustion than fear now. The baby had been quiet for hours, which terrified her more than any threat Marcus could make. She'd hidden the remaining bearer bonds in 3 separate locations throughout the house, behind loose floorboards in the library, inside the hollowed-out spine of Mrs. Whitmore's Bible, and taped beneath the kitchen sink's basin. The rest of the fortune was already secured in the safety deposit box downtown, but these she'd kept as insurance, as bargaining chips for the inevitable confrontation. The sound of footsteps on the front porch sent ice through her veins. They'd found her. Sarah climbed back upstairs, her breath coming in short gasps. Through the lace curtains, she could see 3 figures approaching. Marcus's broad silhouette unmistakable even in the fading daylight. She recognized the second man as Vincent Torrino, the crime boss's grandson she'd researched at the library. The third was a woman she'd never seen before, elegant and dangerous in her expensive coat. The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire house. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice boomed through the foyer. "Enough games. We know you found it." She pressed herself against the dining room wall, hand instinctively covering her belly. The contractions had been coming irregularly all day. Stress, she told herself, not labor, not yet. "The house is surrounded," the woman called out, her accent cultured, European. "There's nowhere to run. We simply want what belongs to us." Sarah almost laughed at that. What belonged to them? The fortune that had been stolen from banks, insurance companies, innocent victims over 3 generations, the money that Mrs. Whitmore had helped hide, making herself an unwitting accomplice to decades of crime. "Mrs. Whitmore never told you where it was, did she?" Sarah called back, buying time. She took that secret to her grave. Heavy footsteps moved through the house, systematic and methodical. They were searching room by room. "Clever girl," Vincent Torrino's voice drifted from the kitchen. "But not clever enough. You think we didn't notice the safety deposit box? Bank records are surprisingly easy to access when you know the right people." Sarah's heart sank. They knew about the bank. Her carefully planned escape route had been compromised from the start. "However," the woman continued, "we're reasonable people. You can't possibly have spent all of it yet. Return what you've taken, and we'll let you disappear quietly. You and your child can start fresh somewhere far away." A sharp pain lanced through Sarah's abdomen, so sudden and intense that she bit her lip to keep from crying out. When it passed, she felt warmth spreading down her legs. Her water had broken. The baby was coming now, whether she was ready or not. "I need to think about this," Sarah called out, her voice strained. She needed time, needed to get to a hospital, needed help. But surrounded as she was, none of that seemed possible. Marcus appeared in the dining room doorway, his expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. Behind him, Vincent and the woman flanked the entrance, blocking any escape. "You're hurt," Marcus observed, noticing her posture, the way she gripped the table's edge. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Sarah doubled over, unable to hide her condition any longer. "She's in labor," the woman said sharply. "Vincent, call your doctor, the discreet one." "No," Sarah gasped between waves of pain. "Hospital! I need a hospital!" Marcus stepped closer, and for a moment his face softened with something approaching concern. "Sarah, just tell us where the money is, all of it. We'll take you to the hospital, make sure you and the baby are safe. And then?" Sarah managed to ask. The silence stretched between them, answering her question more clearly than words ever could. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out one of the bearer bonds, a small one worth $50,000. She let it flutter to the floor between them. "There's more," she said, "hidden throughout the house. But I'm the only one who knows where." Vincent moved forward eagerly, but the woman held up a restraining hand. "She's buying time," the woman said, "and we're going to give it to her. Vincent, make that call. We need the baby born alive and healthy. Sarah won't talk while she thinks her child is in danger." Another contraction gripped Sarah, and this time she couldn't suppress the cry of pain. The woman was right. She would endure anything, sacrifice anything, to protect her unborn child, even if it meant trusting the very people who planned to kill her once they had what they wanted. "Help me," Sarah whispered, the words torn from her by desperation and agony. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Victorian's front porch as Maya finished loading the last of her belongings into Detective Chen's unmarked car. Her swollen belly made every movement deliberate, but she refused help with the small duffel bag that contained everything she owned. Behind her, the mansion stood silent, its weathered boards and broken shutters holding their secrets once more. "The new owner won't take possession for another month," Chen said, closing the trunk. "Gives us time to make sure everyone who might be interested knows the house has been thoroughly searched." Maya nodded, one hand resting on her stomach where the baby had been unusually active all morning. "And the Kowalski family?" Victor's singing like a canary. "Turns out there were more people involved than we thought. A whole network spanning 3 generations. Most of them are already in custody." Chen's expression softened. "You did the right thing, Maya. That money was cursed." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd given up a fortune that could have secured her child's future, but in keeping it, she might not have lived to see that future unfold. The Witness Protection Program would relocate them far from the city, far from the Victorian and its ghosts, but it would also give them something money couldn't buy: safety. A contraction gripped her suddenly, stronger than the practice ones she'd been experiencing all week. Maya gripped the car door, breathing through it until it passed. Chen noticed immediately. How far apart are they? This is only the second one. Maya checked her phone. About 20 minutes since the last. We need to get moving then. The safe house has been prepared and there's a hospital nearby with an excellent maternity ward. As they drove away, Maya watched the Victorian shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared behind a cluster of oak trees. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore, who had died alone in that house, surrounded by wealth but isolated from human connection. The old woman had chosen solitude over the messiness of relationships, hoarding both money and secrets until they became her prison. Maya had made a different choice. The money she'd turned over to authorities would be held as evidence indefinitely, likely never returned to circulation. But in exchange, she'd gained something Eleanor never had, a chance at a real life, however uncertain. Another contraction hit as they merged onto the highway. This time it lasted nearly a minute, intense enough to make her gasp. Chen glanced at her with growing concern. "Change of plans," he said, taking the next exit. "We're heading straight to the hospital, but the safe house can wait. This baby isn't following our schedule." The next hour blurred together in a rush of hospital corridors, admissions paperwork hastily filled out with her new identity, and medical staff who asked no questions about the police escort. Maya found herself in a delivery room much sooner than expected, with Chen standing awkwardly in the hallway while nurses bustled around, preparing for an arrival that seemed increasingly imminent. Dr. Martinez, a woman about Maya's age with kind eyes and steady hands, checked her progress with professional efficiency. First babies usually take their time, but this little one seems eager to meet the world. Maya gripped the bed rails as another contraction peaked. Between waves of pain, she found herself thinking about the Victorian's nursery with its faded wallpaper and broken rocking chair. She'd imagined fixing it up, creating a sanctuary for her child among the mansion's restored rooms. Instead, her baby would enter the world in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing of the journey that brought them here. But perhaps that was better. The Victorian carried too much history, too much pain. Her child deserved a fresh start, unburdened by the sins and secrets of previous generations. "It's time," Dr. Martinez announced. And suddenly Maya was pushing, her body taking over with an ancient rhythm that transcended all the chaos of recent weeks. The money, the danger, the fear, everything fell away except this primal moment of bringing life into the world. With a final surge of effort that seemed to draw from depths she didn't know she possessed, Maya heard the thin, indignant cry of her daughter announcing her arrival. Through tears she didn't remember starting, she watched as the tiny, perfect being was placed on her chest, warm and slippery and absolutely real. "She's beautiful," Dr. Martinez said softly. Maya looked down at her daughter's scrunched face, already showing signs of the determination that would serve her well in whatever life awaited them. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark and serious, as if she understood the gravity of her entrance into a complicated world. "Hello, Sarah," Maya whispered, having chosen the name weeks ago. It meant princess, but also meant strength. "We're going to be just fine." Outside the delivery room, Detective Chen fielded calls from his team, coordinating the final details of their relocation while a new life began its story, free from the shadows of old mansions and buried treasure.